The dog wouldn't stop digging. 3 days straight, always in the same spot in the abandoned barn. When Jacob finally decided to investigate, his hands trembled as they touched the cold metal buried in the earth. That thing shouldn't be there. And what came next would change everything. Jacob Farmer was 52 years old when he lost everything. The family farm he'd inherited from his father, 500 acres in rural Missouri, went to auction after a blight wiped out 3 harvests in a row, and the banks lost their patience. 30 years of work evaporated on a Tuesday morning, when the auctioneer's gavel fell for the last time. His wife Martha held his hand so tightly her nails left marks. Their 2 children, Luke, 17, and Sophia, 14, cried in the back of the old pickup truck as they drove away for the last time from the only home they had ever known. Jacob had just $3,000 in his pocket. It was all that remained after paying the most urgent debts. $3,000 and a family to support. No home, no job, no visible future. For 2 months they lived in a rented room in the town of Oakdale. Jacob worked as a handyman on other people's properties. Martha cleaned houses, and the children helped where they could. Every night, Jacob looked at the cracked ceiling and felt the weight of bankruptcy crushing his chest. It was Luke who saw the ad in the old newspaper they used to line the table. Farm for sale, 100 acres, Cedar Creek region. Price below market for urgent sale. Interested parties call the number. Jacob took the paper from his son's hands and read it 3 times. The price was exactly $3,000. Almost everything he had. It was madness. It was financial suicide. But something about that ad pulled him like a fishhook. The next day, they took the pickup and drove 100 miles to Cedar Creek. The real estate agent, a fat man named Walter with sweat dripping down his temples, was waiting for them at the entrance to a dirt road. As they drove down the potholed road, Jacob felt his stomach sinking. The property was worse than he had imagined. Much worse. The main house was a brick building with a partially collapsed roof. Broken windows revealed a dark, damp interior. Weeds grew waist-high all around. A wooden barn leaned dangerously to one side, like a drunk about to fall. Walter cleared his throat nervously. "The property needs a few repairs," he said with a grotesque euphemism, "but the land is good. Has well water, electricity already installed, and the paperwork is all in order." Jacob walked the property in silence. Martha followed a few steps behind, her face a mask of worry. The children explored the ruins with that morbid curiosity young people have for abandoned places. "Why is it so cheap?" Jacob finally asked. "What's the real problem?" Walter hesitated, then sighed. The last owner disappeared 4 years ago. Mr. Arthur Miller, a widower, no children. One day he just vanished. The police investigated, found nothing. Eventually declared him legally dead, and the distant heirs put the property up for sale. People in the area say the place is cursed, that there's something buried here. Nonsense, of course, but it scares buyers away. Jacob looked at the destroyed house, the crooked barn, the fields covered in weeds. He saw what others didn't. He saw good land under the invasive vegetation. He saw structures that, although damaged, still had solid foundations. He saw a last chance. They closed the deal a week later. $3,000, leaving just $1,000 to start repairs and buy the bare minimum of supplies. It was insanity. Martha cried when they signed the papers, but not from joy. The family moved on a rainy March afternoon. Their possessions all fit in the bed of the pickup truck. Some clothes, old pots, 4 thin mattresses, and Rex, the mutt Luke had adopted from the street and refused to abandon. Rex was a strange animal. Medium-sized dark brown fur, with irregular white patches. He had one ear up and one flopped down, but his eyes were intensely intelligent. And from the first moment he set foot on the abandoned farm, Rex started acting strangely. He sniffed obsessively at every corner, every wall, every patch of earth. He growled low at the barn. He refused to enter the main house at night. Luke found it funny, but Jacob felt a growing discomfort. The first days were brutal. They worked from sunup to sundown, just to make the house minimally habitable. Jacob repaired part of the roof with salvaged shingles and plastic tarp. Martha cleaned the interior, removing years of dirt, rat nests, and even a coral snake that almost bit her. Luke and Sophia cleared the weeds around the house, creating a safe perimeter. At night they fell exhausted onto the mattresses spread on the cold concrete floor. There was no furniture, no heating, barely any food. In the second week, Jacob realized the money was running out faster than expected. They needed to eat, they needed basic tools, they needed building materials. And there was no apparent work nearby. The nearest farm was 5 miles away, and they had already made it clear they had no work to offer. It was on a Friday afternoon that Rex started digging. Jacob was in the field trying to assess the soil when he heard the frantic barking coming from the barn. He ran there and found Rex digging furiously in a dark corner, dirt flying everywhere, the dog practically hysterical. "Stop, Rex," Jacob ordered, but the animal didn't stop. He kept digging, scratching, whining as if something under the earth was calling him. Luke appeared, panting. "Dad, he's been like this since yesterday. Every time we pull him away, he comes back and starts again." Jacob looked at the hole, already 1/2 meter deep. "It's just a dog being a dog," he said, but his voice came out less convinced than he intended. "Probably buried a bone and now can't remember where." But Rex didn't find any bone. For 3 days the dog dug. He seemed possessed. He refused food, barely drank water. He just dug, and each day the hole got deeper. On the morning of the 4th day, Martha woke Jacob before dawn. Her face was pale. "You need to see this," she whispered. In the barn, in the weak light of a flashlight, Rex was standing over the hole, which was now over 5 feet deep. But he wasn't digging anymore. He was still, completely motionless, staring fixedly downward, and he was growling, a low, guttural growl of pure terror. Jacob climbed down into the hole with the flashlight. He knelt, ran his hand through the dirt, and felt something cold, metallic. His heart started beating faster. With trembling hands, he started digging around the object. It was large, rectangular, buried with care. It took another 2 hours to unearth it completely. When he finally pulled the rusted metal box out, Martha gasped. Luke and Sophia, awakened by the noise, came running down the stairs and froze. The box was about 2 feet long, by 1.5 feet wide, and 8 inches high. It was very heavy. It had an old padlock, completely corroded by rust. Jacob looked at his family. No one spoke. The silence in the barn was absolute, broken only by Rex's panting as he continued to growl at the box. Martha was the first to speak, her voice barely a whisper. "Open it." Jacob grabbed an old sledgehammer he had found days before. He positioned the box on the ground, took a deep breath, and struck. The padlock shattered on the second blow. The lid was stuck with rust, but with effort it gave way. When Jacob opened the box, the world seemed to stop. Inside was money. Stacks and stacks of old bills, carefully arranged and wrapped in plastic. But they weren't dollars. They were US dollars. For several seconds, no one moved. They just stared at that impossible sight. Luke was the first to react. "Dad, is that real?" Jacob picked up one of the stacks with trembling hands. The bills were old, stained by moisture, but recognizable. $100 bills. He started counting. One stack had 100 bills. $10,000. He counted the stacks. There were 23. $230,000 buried in the barn of an abandoned farm. Martha sat down heavily on the floor, her legs no longer supporting her. Sophia started to cry. Luke laughed, a hysterical laugh of shock and disbelief. Jacob quickly closed the box, as if the money might disappear if exposed for too long. He picked up the box, heavy as if carrying gold bricks, and took it inside the house, hid it under the mattress where they slept. That night, no one slept. They sat in the empty living room, by the light of a single candle, looking at each other with a mixture of euphoria and terror. Martha finally verbalized what everyone was thinking. Where did this money come from? Jacob thought about what Walter had said. Arthur Miller disappeared 4 years ago, a lonely man who lived isolated on this farm, and he had a fortune in dollars buried in the barn. This can't be legal, Sophia said, with the simple logic of a teenager. Normal people don't bury money like this. Luke suggested that maybe it was an inheritance, something the old man Arthur wanted to protect from the banks, but his voice lacked conviction. Jacob knew his daughter was right. This wasn't legal money. It was hidden money, money from something illicit, drugs, perhaps, or worse. But as he looked at his underweight family, at the cracked walls of his ruined house, at the future without prospects that awaited them, a dark part of him whispered, "So what?" They argued until dawn. Martha wanted to go to the police immediately. Sophia agreed, terrified. Luke was divided. And Jacob just thought about the $1,000 that remained, the bills to pay, the impossibility of surviving another month. When the sun rose, Jacob made a decision. "Let's wait," he said, "just 1 week. We'll investigate Arthur Miller, find out where this money came from. If it's something really dirty, we turn it over to the police. But if it's just an eccentric old man hiding his savings, then maybe we can keep apart, just enough to fix up the farm." Martha looked at her husband with something between disappointment and understanding. She knew he was rationalizing, justifying the unjustifiable. But she also saw the hopelessness they had lived through in recent months. She saw the children going hungry, and she couldn't find the strength to argue. 1 week, she finally agreed. "But if we find out something really wrong, we turn it all in." During the following days, Jacob discreetly went into town and started asking questions about Arthur Miller. He was careful, pretending to be just a curious new owner, asking about the previous one. What he discovered left him even more confused. Arthur Miller had been a doctor. He worked for 40 years at a hospital in St. Louis. He retired, was widowed, and bought that farm to live out his final years in peace. He was known as a quiet, polite man who paid his bills on time. Nothing about him suggested criminality. So where did $230,000 come from? It was on the 5th day that things started to get really strange. Jacob was in the field when a black pickup truck stopped at the property entrance. 2 men got out. Dark suits, sunglasses, posture that screamed danger. "Good afternoon," said the taller one, a man of perhaps 40 with a scar on his chin. "We're looking for the owner of this farm." Jacob wiped the sweat from his brow, trying to appear calm. "That's me. Can I help you?" The men exchanged a look. The shorter one, fat with a thin mustache, asked, "You bought this property recently?" "I did, 2 weeks ago. And have you found anything unusual around here?" the tall man asked, his voice too casual. Jacob's heart raced, but he kept a neutral expression. "Unusual like? Old documents, perhaps? Stored boxes? Things the previous owner might have left?" Jacob pretended to think. "No, nothing but junk. Why do you ask?" The tall man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just tying up loose ends from Arthur Miller's estate. If you find anything, it would be kind to contact us." He handed over a card. The name said only Robert Smith, with a phone number. The men returned to the pickup, but before getting in, The fat one looked directly at Jacob and said, "Nice property. It'd be a shame if something happened to it, or to your family." It wasn't a question, it was a threat. The pickup drove away, leaving a cloud of dust. Jacob stood still, the card in his shaking hand, cold sweat running down his back despite the heat. When he returned home, he told Martha everything. Her face turned white as paper. "They know," she said, "or they suspect, and they came looking for it." Sophia started crying. Luke suggested burying the box again, deeper, in another place. But Jacob knew that wouldn't solve anything. That night, Rex started acting strangely again. He barked at the barn, growled, scratched the floor, as if there was something more there. Jacob took the flashlight and a shovel. Against all good sense, he returned to the barn alone. He climbed down into the original hole and started digging deeper. 1 meter below where he had found the money box, his shovel hit something hard again, something that made a hollow sound. His blood ran cold. With trembling hands, he dug around it. It wasn't metal this time. It was wood, rotted but recognizable. It was a coffin. Jacob jumped out of the hole as if he were on fire. He ran to the house, woke the family, called the police. 2 hours later, the farm was full of patrol cars. Crime scene investigators illuminated the barn with powerful spotlights. Sheriff Dawson, a serious man in his 60s, interrogated Jacob while his team carefully exhumed whatever was buried. When they finally removed the lid of the makeshift coffin, they found not 1, but 2 bodies in an advanced state of decomposition. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of someone vomiting in the corner. Sheriff Dawson looked at Jacob with an unreadable expression. "Mr. Farmer, you're going to have to come with us to give a statement. And you're going to have to tell me everything, absolutely everything, you found on this property." At the sheriff's station, Jacob had no choice. He told them about the money box, about Rex digging obsessively, about the men in suits asking threatening questions. Dawson listened to everything in silence. When Jacob finished, the sheriff sighed heavily and said something that changed everything. Arthur Miller wasn't just an ordinary doctor. 15 years ago, he was investigated for performing illegal abortions. We never proved anything, but there were rumors. And you know who else was involved in those rumors? Robert Smith, the man who gave you the card. Jacob felt his stomach sink. The bodies. We're still identifying them, but my hypothesis is that they were patients who didn't survive the procedures. Miller buried them to hide the evidence. And the money was probably payment for those illegal operations. Money he could never spend without raising suspicions. And him, Arthur, what happened to him? Dawson looked out the window at the dark night outside. That's the $2-100-N-30-1000- dollar question, isn't it? My theory, Robert Smith and his partners found out about the money, came to collect their share. Miller refused or didn't have all the money anymore, was killed. They tore the farm apart, but found nothing. And for 4 years they waited for someone to buy the property and stumble upon that fortune. And now they have, Jacob completed, feeling the nausea rising. Dawson nodded. You're in danger. Robert isn't going to give up. And now that we know about the bodies, they have even more motivation to silence witnesses. Jacob thought of Martha, of Luke, of Sophia. What was going to happen to them? The sheriff made a proposal. We'll use you as bait. You'll pretend you only found the money, not the bodies. You'll contact Robert, set up a meeting, offer to return part of the money in exchange for being left alone. We'll be there, waiting. We arrest Robert and his gang, and you and your family enter the witness protection program until the trial. And if it goes wrong? Jacob asked in a hoarse voice. Dawson didn't answer. He didn't need to. Jacob spent 3 days thinking, 3 days watching his family live in fear, watching every car that passed on the road, sleeping in shifts to stand guard. On the third day, he made the decision. He called the number on the card. Robert answered on the second ring. His voice was smooth, almost friendly. "Mr. Farmer, I hope you have good news." "I've found something," Jacob said, his voice firm despite the fear. "A box. With money." There was a pause. "How much?" $230,000. Another pause, longer. "I see. And what do you propose?" "I keep half, you take half, and you leave me alone." Robert laughed. A cold laugh without humor. "I don't think you understand how this works. That money isn't yours. Not technically mine either. It belonged to Arthur, and now that he's no longer here to claim it, it belongs to whoever finds it first. I found it first, but I know where you live. I know where your kids go to school. I know exactly where your wife shops every Thursday." Jacob's blood ran cold. "Is that a threat?" "It's a fact. I'll give you 24 hours to reconsider. Either bring all the money to me, or I'll come get it myself. And believe me, Mr. Farmer, when I come to get something, I don't usually leave witnesses." The call was cut off. Jacob sat down heavily, the phone still in his hand. Dawson, who had listened to the whole conversation on a headset, put a hand on his shoulder. "He's going to come," the sheriff said, "and we'll be ready." The next 24 hours were the longest of Jacob's life. Martha and the children were taken to a safe house in a neighboring town. At the farm, only Jacob, 4 plainclothes police officers, and Rex, who refused to leave Luke's side and had to stare, remained. Dawson positioned his men strategically, 2 in the barn, 1 in the house, 1 in the back. Jacob would be alone in the open area, with the money box by his side. The bait. When it got dark, Jacob lit a bonfire in the center of the yard, as Dawson had ordered. The fire would illuminate anyone approaching, giving the snipers an advantage. Midnight passed. 1 a.m. too. At 2:30, Rex started to growl. Jacob felt every muscle in his body tense. He heard the sound of vehicles approaching. Not 1, but 3. Black pickups, headlights off, using only the full moon as a guide. They stopped 50 meters from the bonfire. 7 men got out. Robert was in front. "Mr. Farmer," he shouted, "I see you've made the sensible decision." Jacob stood up, his legs trembling. "The money is here." Robert walked closer, his men forming a semicircle behind him. When he was 10 meters away, he stopped and smiled. "You know your problem, Farmer. You're too honest for this game. Honest men don't survive situations like this." He brought his hand to his pocket. Jacob saw the metallic glint of a gun. It was then that Dawson shouted, "Police!" and hell broke loose. Spotlights exploded from all directions. The 7 men pulled guns. Shots echoed in the night. Jacob threw himself to the ground, covering his head. The shootout lasted less than a minute, but felt like an eternity. When the silence returned, Jacob raised his trembling head. 3 of Robert's men were on the ground, dead or wounded. The other 4, including Robert, had their hands on their heads, surrounded by police shouting orders. Jacob saw Dawson walking towards Robert, handcuffs in hand. "Robert Smith, you're under arrest for extortion, making threats, and involvement in multiple homicides." Robert spat blood. He had taken a bullet in the shoulder. "You can't prove anything," he said. Dawson smiled coldly. "We don't need to. You just confessed to everything on camera." He pointed to microphones hidden in the trees around them. Every word recorded. Robert's expression crumbled. 2 weeks later, Jacob was sitting in Sheriff Dawson's office. The results of the forensic tests had come in. The 2 bodies were women, both between 25 and 30 years old. Both died of hemorrhage after poorly performed abortions. One was identified as Carla Mendez, who disappeared in 2008. The other was still being identified. Arthur Miller was never found. Probably murdered and buried somewhere we'll never discover, Dawson explained. Robert and his partners confessed to the whole scheme. They paid Arthur to perform illegal abortions. When they found out he was hiding part of the money, they killed him. And the money? Jacob asked. What happens now? Dawson placed a thick folder on the table. Technically, it's evidence of a crime, but Arthur Miller's legal heirs renounced any rights to the property and its contents when they sold it. The victims have no living family to claim compensation. And you, Mr. Farmer, besides having done the right thing by reporting everything, also risked your life helping to arrest a dangerous gang. Jacob hardly dared to understand. What are you saying? I'm saying that, after the trial, if Robert and his partners are convicted, the remaining money will probably be donated to the state or could be considered found abandoned property. Your lawyer should look into it. 3 months later, after a swift trial where Robert and 4 of his partners were sentenced to prison terms totaling 80 years, a judge decided that the $230,000 already exchanged for the full amount would be given to Jacob Farmer. After all, he had been the discoverer, had acted with integrity, and had helped the cause of justice. With that money, Jacob not only completely renovated the farm, but transformed it. He installed modern irrigation systems, bought equipment, planted premium-grade corn and soybeans on 50 acres, and left another 40 for dairy cattle pasture. Within 2 years, the farm everyone considered cursed became one of the most productive in the region. Luke enrolled in agronomy school. Sophia was accepted into veterinary school. Marla opened a small, artisanal cheese shop that sold to restaurants in 3 states. And Rex lived another 8 years, always treated as the 4-legged hero he was. When he finally died of old age, he was buried under a tree in the center of the farm with a headstone that read, Rex, the dog who saved a family. Jacob sometimes still visited the barn, now completely renovated and used as a storage shed. He looked at the new concrete floor that covered the place where Rex had dug, and he silently thanked old Arthur Miller, not for having buried that money, but for having created a situation that allowed Jacob to prove that, even at rock bottom, even with $230,000 at stake, he was still an honest man. Because, in the end, it wasn't the money that saved the Farmer family. It was integrity, the courage to do the right thing even when it would have been so easy to do the wrong thing. And that Jacob thought every time he saw the sun rising over his prosperous fields was worth more than all the gold in the world. And, if this story moved you, leave your like now and subscribe to the channel. Here you'll find real stories of mystery, overcoming adversity, and plot twists that will keep you hooked until the end. Turn on the bell, because every week there's a new story that will surprise you. And leave in the comments, would you have turned the money over to the police, or would you have been tempted to keep it all? Be honest. We read all the comments. Until the next story.